Oh my god. I owe you all a diegesis in film part 2 video, don't I? Seriously, thanks for being patient on this front, guys. I won't bore you with details as to why part 2 has been held up for all these months, nor will I retread upon territory or terminology that I already talked about in part 1. Let's just get right into it. I promised you 2 examples of films that either blur the lines when it comes to their diegetic and non-diegetic elements, or provide really hard boundaries between those 2 aspects. And it just so happens that both of these films came from not just a certain period in filmmaking, but also a particular company.
Though only in operation for a handful of years in the 60s, the influence of Raybert Productions, later to be renamed BBS Productions, should not be downplayed. Though the dawn of the new Hollywood era arguably began with the debut of films like 1967's Bonnie and Clyde, it was producers like Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider, who were later joined by Stephen Blauner, that took the baton of innovation and ran with it. With the industry experiencing diminishing returns on their extravagant productions and failing to connect with younger audiences that were finding deeper roots in counterculture and bucking the establishment, it was companies like BBS that sought out younger voices in front of and behind the cameras.
And Raybert Productions chose a sitcom that parodied the biggest musical group of the time to pin all of their hopes on.
The Monkees television series first aired in the fall of 1966. Thanks to both quality songwriting and incorporating surreal comedy with new wave production techniques, the misadventures of the fictional band garnered critical and commercial success over a 2-season run. Rafelson and Schneider saw this as their opportunity to break into feature films with their own send-up of movies like A Hard Day's Night and Help.
And the result is one of the twistiest roller coaster rides between diegesis and non-diegesis that I have ever witnessed. Are there other works of cinema out there that play more so with their diegetic and non-diegetic balance than 1968's Head? Probably yeah, but what I find so fascinating about this particular film is how it's constantly tearing down and rebuilding those boundaries. Of course, what would you expect from the brainchild of the Monkees, Bob Rafelson, Jack Nicholson, and a whole lot of hallucinogens? Yup, the 60s.
Apparently, the story treatment for the film came about from a long weekend at a California resort where the producers, the band, and young Jack smoked a whole bunch of weed and recorded ideas on tape in a very stream of consciousness style.
And then Jack Nicholson did what any aspiring screenwriter would do and organized all of these ideas into a cohesive screenplay, while under the influence of LSD. Double yup. It was the 60s.
So when I say narrative, I'm stretching that term to say the least. At its basic storytelling core, Head plays more as the Monkees lampooning the situations their down-on-their-luck alter egos would find themselves in on the show, just played with a more cynical and bizarre edge. A lot of this tone throughout the film may have stemmed from the group's desire to break free from their polished TV image and reflect more of the turbulent political and societal discourse taking place at the time.
Hey, we are the Monkees. You know we love to please. A manufactured image with no philosophies. The money's in, we're made of tin, we're here to give you...
There was also quite a bit of tension between Rafelson and the group regarding creative control, which resulted in all of the Monkees, save for Peter Tork, walking out on shooting for the first day. And I wholeheartedly believe that a lot of this behind-the-scenes tension permeates into the diegetic and non-diegetic narratives.
How do you feel now?
Oh, come see, come start.
All right, that's enough. That's front it, please. Good hit.
Right. Peter, I hate to interrupt you. Yeah, I know it's for your niece. It's quite all right. What's your name? Barry. And think of it, the kids aren't going to dig it, man. Me hitting a girl. Especially the way I feel about violence and all that stuff, you know?
Sure, it would be easy to say that this is just a drugged-out trip we're witnessing, or that it's being bizarre for bizarreness' sake, but the boundaries between the in-universe reasoning for the characters and their narrative is constantly shifting and accommodating the audience to be brought in a little bit more. Surreal imagery suddenly becomes the real. Initial non sequiturs suddenly become the status quo, and performances and settings will suddenly drop their facade and completely redefine our perception of what the film's diegesis actually is.
Stop kicking me!
Oh, I don't want to do this anymore, man. Oh, these fake arrows and this junk and the fake trees. Bob, I'm through.
Just when you think the characters can't be any more self-aware or more breaking of the fourth wall, the film then peels back another layer to then incorporate the non-diegetic elements into a new establishment of the universe.
Despite being entertainingly bizarre, I wouldn't categorize this film as fun. A lot of real-world bitterness, self-doubt, and fear seeps into the imagery and dialogue. That actually gives Head a more anarchistic tone to help it stand apart from its more whimsical and breezier contemporaries like Help, or even the Monkees' own TV show. And again, it makes defining where the on-screen world's boundaries end and the audience's access points begin all the more nebulous.
It certainly is a bold move to begin your career in movies with a film that's not only anti-establishment, but anti-storytelling. So it's probably no surprise that Head didn't go over so well upon its initial release. They weren't really able to rein in the teenage crowd that had followed the Monkees on TV, and older audiences just... the concept of this film went right over their heads. The film went on to become something of a cult classic, and you can appreciate now a lot of its filmmaking and storytelling techniques, but if you're craving a movie that has a tighter, more cohesive narrative that adheres to very diegetic and non-diegetic principles, this movie isn't it. Head is actively on a mission to spite you when it comes to those particular parameters.
But while that movie wasn't a runaway success, Rafelson and Schneider still had enough clout and resources to continue producing films. They brought on Blauner, changed their name to BBS Productions, and churned out movies that were far more reserved and linear than Head, but were still able to tread into experimental territory.
And in 1971, they produced a movie that I feel is the pitch-perfect example of establishing a very unflinching in-frame diegesis.
We will always be so loyal to the man.
Based on the 1966 novel of the same name, The Last Picture Show is a coming-of-age story that focuses mainly on a few local teens in a small North Texas town in the early 50s. Several different themes are given quiet and somber meditation throughout the film, such as the decline of opportunities in destitute communities, the complexities of burgeoning sexuality, and the loss of innocence with age. It stars a baby-faced Jeff Bridges, introduces audiences to a teenage Sybil Shepherd, and garnered Oscar wins for Ben Johnson and Cloris Leachman.
Even young Randy Quaid got his start in this movie, so that's...
God, I'm glad it wasn't on fire. I would have burned to death before you got one button undone.
That's something.
Oh, and the less said about its sequel, the better.
Anywho, I could sing the praises of this movie all the live long day, but we're here to talk about diegesis, because director Peter Bogdanovich's divide between the world on screen and the audience is a very hard one.
While I mentioned before that other BBS fares such as Easy Rider or Drive, he said, weren't as surreal with their storytelling as Head was, they still were able to bend the rules at times of what constituted in-world narrative and what stylistically was more immersive for the audience. In The Last Picture Show, about the only non-diegetic elements on display are the cuts and occasional crossfades to depict scene transitions or the passage of time. Everything else has a stringent, in-universe reason for being there or taking place. When perspective shifts to a character's point of view, there is no self-aware commentary or stylistic exaggeration. The imagery proper presents it all.
For a product born of counterculture, the editing, pacing, and lighting of the film is actually pretty traditional. It's almost as if Bogdanovich wanted to have kind of a send-up to traditional Hollywood filmmaking techniques without wanting to play even further into non-diegetic or more melodramatic aspects that were prevalent in the previous era. And a major factor that I feel contributes greatly to this is how he handles the soundtrack for The Last Picture Show.
You find somebody else to pester. I've got a new boyfriend, and I can't be talking
What
to
new boyfriend? Who?
Bobby Sheen, of course.
Bobby Sheen? You crazy?
I certainly am not. I guess I've just been wanting to go with him all along and never realized it.
There is a wide selection of music in this film, but it's always given an in-universe explanation for being heard. When a romantic song plays, for example, it's because it's playing on a character's car radio in the background, and not solely to telegraph a mood or emotion for the unseen audience. For other scenes, there is only the naturally occurring silence and sounds of the moment. There is no swell of music for the romantic interludes of Sonny and Ruth. There is only...
And it's those choices to purposely rein in the visuals and soundtrack of The Last Picture Show to only function within the world established on screen that makes the characters and their themes all the more emotionally resonant, in my personal opinion. There's one scene that exemplifies this that I always come back to. It's when Ben Johnson's character, Sam the Lion, is recalling his lost love from years ago to the film's main character, Sonny.
One day she wanted to swim the horses across this tank. Kind of a crazy thing to do, but we'd done it anyway. She bet me a silver dollar she could beat me across. She did. I bet she still got that silver dollar.
This is all that is presented to us in this scene. No background music outside of the diegesis dictating our emotional response. No stylistic flashbacks or superimposed imagery to accompany the monologue. It's just the natural rhythm of Sam recalling the story for no one other than Sonny that makes it such a satisfying moment. I wouldn't be surprised if Ben Johnson got his Oscar for this scene alone. There is a beautiful sadness inherent in the quieter moments of the movie, and I feel it was a purposeful choice to not let the non-diegetic aspects detract from that. While a movie like Head revels in its ability to constantly change the rules of its reality for the sake of keeping viewers engaged, in confusion and chaos, The Last Picture Show's unflinching divide between the frame and the audience somehow elicits its own unique emotional connection of solitude and melancholy, mixed with reluctant acceptance of circumstances beyond our control. Is it bleak? Is it depressing? Absolutely. But it's also very, very anchored in the realm of reality.
It's just fascinating to me that BBS was able to use diegetic and non-diegetic elements to various degrees in both of these films, not just to kind of establish a new way for filmmaking to be done in this new era of movies, but also to pay homage and proper respect and sending up of the previous era. I highly recommend checking out the Criterion collection of BBS films in order to gain a wider appreciation of this short-lived period of linear and non-linear storytelling that kind of reshaped what we perceive as being engaging narratives in movies. That's all I really have for you now. I promise more video essays are on the way, hopefully with more expediency than I had prior. Making promises I don't know if I'll keep, but whatever.